In the previous video, we explored a feeling that many thoughtful people recognize. A quiet sense that something about them isn't quite right. A feeling that something still needs adjustment. And when that feeling appears, it's natural to assume that it's pointing to something real, something about our life, about ourselves that needs improvement. And so we go to work on it. We try to understand ourselves better. We refine our habits. We examine our patterns more deeply. And in many ways, this instinct makes sense. Growth, reflection, and learning can be valuable parts of life. But a subtle dynamic begins to form when this self-improvement is driven primarily from the desire to resolve the unease. It's a dynamic that's easy to miss, because when the uneasiness is seen as evidence that something still needs fixing, the unease begins to function like a signal that the work isn't finished yet. And so the mind naturally starts to look for what needs to change. We may begin to refine a habit, make a mindset adjustment, examine a pattern more deeply. And of course, none of this is inherently problematic. Reflection and development can be meaningful parts of being human. But when this entire process is organized around the assumption that the unease needs to be eliminated, a subtle shift and pattern begins to form. Attention gradually shifts more and more towards correction. You begin to notice your reactions more carefully, examine your thoughts more closely, looking for places where improvement can occur. At first, this can feel very productive. But gradually, over time, the project of self-correction can become more and more central. Not because growth in itself is a problem. No, of course not. But because the feeling that initiated this entire process keeps returning. The restlessness appears again. The tension comes back. And when it does, it's easy to interpret once again this as evidence that something still deeper needs to be addressed. That perhaps the work hasn't gone far enough yet. So the process intensifies. More reflection, more analysis, more effort to become that version of oneself that will finally feel settled. And this is where the dynamic becomes even more interesting. The more attention the mind gives to correcting oneself, the more the search for what needs correction begins to expand. Attention has a powerful influence over the mind. What we begin to look for, we begin to notice more easily. As the mind begins to scan for what needs improvement, it will inevitably find it. Another habit to refine, another pattern to examine or understand more deeply, another part of yourself that needs to be worked on. And so the project continues. This is one of the ways where self-improvement can quietly turn into a trap. Not because growth itself is wrong, not because reflection is bad, but because the premise upon which this entire process is organized is rarely questioned. It's the premise that unease itself is a problem to solve. If that premise is mistaken, this process of correction can never resolve the feeling that began it, because that feeling isn't a sign of a defect. It's a sign of simply being human. Because when unease is the thing that we've organized this entire process around, we've put into motion a project of self-correction that will continue on indefinitely. And this raises an interesting question. If the original unease isn't a problem to solve, then what exactly are we trying to fix? And this is something we'll explore further.